of expertise in early childhood education, literacy, and dyslexia. Callie, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Leanne.
So, I mean, these figures are alarming, but it certainly is a very complicated issue that we're dealing with here. And most people struggle to understand what dyslexia actually means. Perhaps you can help us out on this one.
So simply, dyslexia means people or children who struggle with reading accurately, reading single words, and that impacts on their ability to decode. And then a secondary consequence is that they avoid reading, and your comprehension skills suffer and your vocabulary skills don't grow. And vocabulary really grows exponentially through reading.
Yeah.
So simply they struggle with reading accurately, reading fluently, and encoding, which is spelling.
Okay, so when we look at the high levels of the rate in South Africa in terms of literacy and how bad it is, do you think there is a link between dyslexia and literacy rates that are perhaps not being attended to from a very early age?
You know, dyslexia affects only about 10% of the population.
Okay.
And of that 10% of a population, there's 4% of children who are severely dyslexic. So that 6% of children is huge numbers in terms of our country's numbers of children. But the literacy issue, I don't think is necessarily related to dyslexia.
Okay.
I think we're failing all children. We're failing the average child that would manage to read if they were exposed to good enough teaching firstly. I think appropriate class size, and then I think our inadequate teacher training.
Well, let's go to those points. An adequate class size. What is a good class size?
I don't have a number for that, Leanne,
Okay.
but recently a teacher said to me, as soon as class size goes over 21 children, she loses her mind. So can you imagine our average class size goes between 40 and up to 60. So you're sitting with a sea of children.
It's almost impossible when you think about that to give any focused learning to any child. And how do you spot that child who may have difficulties when you're confronted with 60 children sitting in a class? It's you know, you're putting a teacher into an environment that it is almost impossible to do your job properly.
And you know, reading, unlike speech, is what we say has to be painstakingly bolted onto the brain. Children learn to speak naturally, but reading comes through explicit teaching.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen spontaneously. And most of our children in the early childhood years, their language growth in home language is good enough. So we need to kind of imprint, and the brain develops that network for reading, the plasticity of the brain. There's no specific area for reading in the brain. The brain structure is the same, but we're like creating a network, a highway, and that comes through phonemic awareness, phonics teaching, and exposure to reading.
Are there evidence-based strategies for improving literacy outcomes?
They are. So we've known that for the past 25 years. And I simply put it down what I call the Big Five. And the Big Five came out of a USA study, which is the basis for the science of reading. And essentially it is making children consciously aware of the sounds in language, because when we speak, the sounds of language overlap. But when you're learning phonics, you have to be able to listen to the individual sounds in a word, then map that onto a letter. That is phonics. Then you've got to be exposed to decoding skills, then learning to be able to decode at the speed of lightning, and then attaching meaning to what you're reading. So all of this happens in like 500 milliseconds in the brain. And it is teaching fluency, and it's teaching comprehension and vocabulary. So those are and grammar as well. So you have to have all of those components in the early years.
If I can ask you, in terms of the detection of dyslexia, if we go back there, at what age can you start picking up that your child is dyslexic and the signs to look out for?
You know, parents are the first people to pick up those signs. And we know that parents it's like 50% of parents as compared to 28% of teachers being able to pick up those signs. I think firstly, you pick it up in a child's early childhood years if they struggle with finding words, or their language is very vague. They use a over there, that thing.
Yeah.
Children who don't listen and can't follow nursery rhymes or songs in a nursery school, they might stand in the background. And then children who have they take time to associate a letter with a sound. So in the early childhood years, you're often teaching letter names, letter sounds. That's another key indicator.
Yeah.
So it's essentially that ability to listen to the sounds of the language, breaking a word up, and that's what we call phonemic awareness. Then it's listening, being able to rapidly put a letter to a sound. And there's a third one.
Okay, which has escaped your mind at the moment.
Exactly.
Don't worry, I get you. But you know, the reality is that these are so the age that you say that one could start picking it up.
Between 4 and 6, you could pick it up.
So
and
in other words, and I think this creates a great argument for the compulsory double R, grade double R learning for children and R. I mean, these are essential years within a child's life, in the development of a child's life. And so bringing that in is possibly one of the best things we can do for our children.
Yeah, and I think improving the quality of the caregivers in early childhood centers.
Yeah, indeed.
But that doesn't dismiss the kind of training teachers in primary school need. So teachers in grade 1 need to be aware of the early indicators. And they should be able to screen between grade 1 and grade 3.
Yeah.
Because not every child is going to be able to see a speech and language therapist or a psychologist. So in the early years, we're also looking of primary schooling is letter sound knowledge, phonemic awareness. Those are the key skills that underpin reading.
Okay.
You know, and then that rapid naming, finding the words.
Indeed.
And actually, if you compare a child's listening comprehension to how they struggle with reading, that gives you a sense of this child has adequate cognitive, the underlying foundational skills for reading, but they're just struggling with print.
Yeah.
And that essentially is dyslexia. You struggle with the written word. You don't struggle orally, you don't struggle with reasoning.
It's the written word.
It's the written word.
Callie, thank you for talking to us.